Oli here, and this is my review of Terminus, the fourth story of the 20th season of classic Doctor Who, starring Peter Davison as the Fifth Doctor. Terminus is the 127th story overall. It's 4 parts long and is written by Steve Gallagher. And Terminus is the second story of the Black Guardian Trilogy, and the plot of this story is as follows. Still under the malign influence of the Black Guardian, Tolo sabotages the TARDIS, placing the Doctor and his companions in grave danger. Nissa disappears through an unstable interface with a nearby space liner, and the Doctor begins a desperate search for aboard the ship. When the liner docks at Terminus, a space station at the exact center of the universe, the horrific truth starts to emerge. It may be already too late to save Nissa's life, and the existence of the cosmos is now in peril. So that is the plot of Terminus. So I think Terminus is a really good story. Some fans aren't too fond of the story, but I really enjoyed it. But truth be told, there were some faults that really let the story down, but it's still pretty much an enjoyable story in my opinion. I thought the production was quite good, a little basic, but it was good. The transport ship on Terminus was alright, nothing too fancy in comparison to Mordrin's ship in the last story, but I think my complaint is that the ships they were too similar. I think I did get confused on which was the transport ship and which was actually Terminus itself. But then the contrast made some sense because Terminus was very much like a ship of impending doom, especially with the threat of Lazarus disease looming, and there were some good action scenes as well. The script was quite good, and I think the direction by Mary Ridge was good as well. The plot wasn't so bad, but I think the execution was it had a bad landing, but it was still passable. There wasn't really that big of a damage. There wasn't big damage done, but it was still all right. So Terminus is very much like a season 18 story. Terminus has the hard sci-fi elements, the dreary, dark, serious mood that season 18 had overall, and the idea of Lazarus disease was actually quite good, so to speak. It's a space disease of a sort. It was basically whoever is infected pretty much turns into a leper. So at this point, Lazarus is just basically space COVID of the 1980s. The theme of Terminus was quite good. It does deal with a disease that's very transmissible, and little has been very much done to protect the people from Lazarus, especially as the Vanir were complaining that the company, which I assume is a metaphor for the big pharmaceutical company / the government, weren't doing much to protect them, as they weren't giving enough hydrogen, which was basically like a vaccine of a sort of for Lazarus. I also like the theme of there was also another theme which I quite liked, which was also had like a theme of isolation, hopelessness, and the strange thing about Terminus is that despite all this, no one actually dies, no one actually succumbs to Lazarus disease, no one dies from it. I think everyone just goes back to normal at the end, and despite how dark the story is, actually no one actually dies, which is quite rare for a Doctor Who story, especially in the classics where no one actually dies. There were some decent memorable moments, especially the part 1 cliffhanger when Oli-Versal shouts that Terminus is a leper ship and everyone was going to die was quite memorable. I think it was quite memorable because the delivery was quite hammy, so to speak. It was very over dramatic and quite theatrical. And I think it was also made it quite memorable as well because the Doctor and Nessa were basically like guarding themselves from the Lazar patients. The fight between the Doctor and one of the Vanir was quite good, especially it was good action scenes as well, and I also liked Nissa's departure as well. It was quite emotional, but it was a good exit for the Nissa of Traken, or as how people say it, Nissa of Traken, as in how people say die or whatever. And I also found it was a good moment because I actually had Nissa's Traken theme playing while she was telling the Doctor why she wanted to stay behind on Terminus. So onto the acting, which I think was quite good. Peter Davison was quite good. The Doctor's still very oblivious to the fact that the Black Guardian was still out for his blood, courtesy of Turlo, and he does spend a good portion of the story of Kari, a space pirate, trying to find Nissa and dealing with the Lazars. and the veneer, which he somehow doesn't contract. And this obviously gives the story more, the Fifth Doctor more development as as he's determined to find and save Nissa, but element of his bluntness does come out, especially towards the end when he was pretty much scolding Tegan for not staying in the TARDIS, in which Nissa had to tell him to say to Tegan that it was good to see her after such a traumatic ordeal. But when he was about to leave Nissa, he had a look on his face and he was very sad to see Nissa go and start her new life on Terminus. That's because Nissa was pretty much the only one that was probably the one that actually helped the Doctor deal with Adric's death, or her and Tegan, but Tegan was left behind on Earth, so she was pretty much helping the Doctor cope with that. So, and then I think that's how the two pretty much bonded when they were alone in between the time of Time Flight and the Arc of Infinity. And the look also indicated that he was also concerned about her at the same time because obviously the Doctor being the Doctor, goodbyes aren't really his thing. And this scene was very well acted between our Super Three. Sarah Sutton was incredible. I do think that Terminus is definitely her best performance as Nissa, and this is definitely one of her better written stories. And because of Turlo's sabotage of the TARDIS, Nissa actually ends up on Terminus, and she's quickly found by the Doctor, and she ends up contracting Lazarus disease, which is evident because I think in part 2 or something, she randomly decides to take off her skirt because she was feeling feverish. She's taken by the veneer and she spends most of the story in quarantine and gets cured by the gun, which looks like this weird dog, furry dog creature, so to speak. She decides to stay behind on Terminus so she can help cure those affected by lasers, and she was very sad to go, but she knew that she had a great deal of responsibility on her hands, especially staying in a very dangerous place in Terminus. So Nissa's story does come full circle in a very subtle way, but it's great character development for her. So I'll speak more on Nissa's departure towards the end of the story. Janet Fielding was alright. Tegan doesn't really do much of anything in the story, but as so her and Turler pretty much spend most of the story crawling around an event, and I did like her banter with Turler. It does show that Fielding and Strickland do have some chemistry. Mark Strickson was good. Same as Tegan, he spends most of the story crawling around the event, but he's still pressured by the Black Guardian to try and kill the Doctor, and he's pretty much responsible for the TARDIS ending up on Terminus when he tries to remove the space-time element from the TARDIS as instructed by the Black Guardian. I also like the bit at the end when he ends up back in the TARDIS and the Black Guardian was pretty much knocks him out with that communicator thing. He wakes up shortly after Nissa says her goodbyes to the Doctor and Tegan, and Turlo is very distressed and he simply cannot kill the Doctor, but the Black Guardian is very much insisting that Turlo must kill the Doctor. One of the good things about Terminus is how it pretty much establishes that Turlo is a good-natured person, and he can't even commit murder, and you come to that conclusion in the end. And I really like how Mark Strickland was able to capture that internal struggle he had, and I also liked how Turlo was asking Tegan could she kill anyone in cold blood, and Tegan pretty much dismisses him. So on to the sidecast. They were mostly good, but I do feel like the veneer were quite forgettable. First off, we had Kari. She was a space pirate along with her companion Olvir. They accidentally board the ship carrying laser disease patients, and she aids the Doctor in preventing Terminus from exploding. Afterwards, her and Olvir are marooned on Terminus, leaving the two to find their own way home. Olvir, who was Kari's companion, he became a space pirate because his sister contracted laser disease, and the medical bills to cure his sister were pretty much drained the family dry of money. So he spends most of the story with Nissa and looking for Nissa when the Veneer captured her, but he smuggled himself into Terminus so he can try and save her. And we also had the Veneer. So they were wearing these armor, so this Viking-esque armor, so to speak, and they looked quite disheveled. So they were consisting of Boar, Valgard, Iraq, and Sigurd. There were slaves employed by the company to run Terminus. They were controlled with Hydramon. If they were unable to cure Ola's disease, they will have their supplies cut off. They were led by Iraq and Val. They were led by Iraq. Valgard and the rest of Divine opposed his leadership, and he was even challenged by Valgard. And he would step down if the Valgard was unable to get the Doctor from the Forbidden Zone, which ended up happening. Board discovered that there was a radiation leak where he got injured, but then nothing really happened to him. I think they were all eventually freed when Nissa discovered that she could synthesize the Hydromel. And lastly, we had the gun. There was this humanoid dog-looking creature that was controlled by the Veneer. He was able to heal Nissa from Lazarus and placed her in the decontamination chamber when she was exposed to the radiation, which ended up curing her from the disease. And the overarching villain of the story was the Black Guardian. Doctor Who Wiki actually does say that Eric was the main villain of the story, but I don't think he does anything too noticeable / villainous in the plot. Still wanting Turlo to kill the Doctor, he tells Turlo to take the space-time element from the TARDIS, which goes awfully wrong and it causes the TARDIS to malfunction, landing upon the ship to Terminus. And the only way to leave was through Nissa's room. The Black Guardian does not have a direct involvement in the story, in the main conflict with Laz's disease and all that, but he does spend most of the story berating Turlo for not killing the Doctor. So, on to the faults I have with the story, which I do find quite disappointing because it did really ruin Terminus, and I think the first one was how Tegan and Turlo were written, especially Tegan, even though they had great chemistry together, but the two of them pretty much spend 90% of the story in the vents crawling around trying to look for the Doctor. Tegan somehow ends up in Terminus in episode 4 and she doesn't meet the Doctor until the very last few minutes of the story, while Turlo remains in the TARDIS trying to get through to the Black Guardian. And Terminus is an example of why a team of 3 companions doesn't really work most of the times, because this is a very Nissa-centric story and Tegan and Turlo are very much put in the back burner. And this was an issue that was in season 19 because you had Nissa, Adric, and Tegan together, and they will all have their own stories, and then some stories you just have others being put in the back burner whilst the others were pretty much dominated the story. Another fault I noticed was that some of the scenes were and dialogue as well, very questionable. So I think one of them was obviously when Nissa was struck with Lazarus and started feeling feverish, and her solution was to take off her skirt in front of Olvir, and I actually found that scene quite funny because the actor who played Olvir was trying very hard not to look, even though it's Sarah Sutton's idea, as she thought it was a parting gift for the fans as fan service, but yeah, it did feel a bit awkward, and it actually makes the scene even worse when the Doctor finds her skirt and finds blood on it, and he actually says, this is a skirt, there's blood on it, and that was very awkward. And also another thought was the Garm. I thought it was a very weird character. He did serve a purpose to the plot, but I found him rather strange. He was just merely a character that was just there to fix the main problem. I think he was just there for plot convenience, like Terminus exploding, and finally the Black Guardian himself. Obviously, this was an intentional decision, but this story made the Black Guardian quite very unreasonable. Yes, I know he wants the Doctor there, but Turlo wasn't even with the Doctor for the vast majority of the story, and he was still punishing Turlo once he still wanted the Doctor dead, even though Turlo was nowhere even near the Doctor for at least most of the story. And I just thought that it was quite unfair. It was just the Black Guardian was just being an arsehole just for the sake of the more of an arsehole, more than just being evil. So now on to Nissa's departure. So Nissa decides to stay on Terminus to help cure Lazarus patients after discovering that she could make more of the Hydromel, and to ensure that the effects of the cure doesn't have any adverse events that will crop up anywhere in the future. Even though this is another abrupt departure, this was actually a very good departure for Nissa, and it does help build her character and make her character come full circle. Because it's pretty evident that she's very much grown up. Like, she's no longer the young girl that we saw at the tail end of season 18 on Traken, and even though she was quite competent in the Keeper of Traken, but then she ends up overcoming the trauma of her father getting killed by the Master, and the Master taking over her father's body, and seeing the master in her father's body trying to destroy the universe, and obviously seeing her home planet getting destroyed by the entropy wave. And I do think that obviously Nissa has obviously decided to take after her late father, Tremus, who obviously helped others, even though it helped putting herself in a dangerous situation. Just how Tremus, in the Keeper of Truck, incited the Doctor throughout the entire story when the Doctor was pretty much on track and being accused of causing the issues on track, and the stacks were like very highly stacked against the Doctor. I do feel as if Nissa was very underdeveloped in her time in the TARDIS, but she did have a subtle, as I said before, she did have a very subtle character arc, getting over her father's death and the destruction of Truck at the hands of the Master, and Nissa was still quite stoic, showing no signs of like. Even though I think this is just a fault by the writers, but Nissa didn't really. She just carried on as usual. She just took it in stride after everything. Even with the Doctor's regeneration, she just took everything in stride, and I think she was more. And I think after Adric died, she was somewhat more open about her feelings in a way. I think this is one of the reasons why she's my favorite companion of the Fifth Doctor, because I do kind of relate to her in terms of like finding it a bit difficult to open up to people and stuff like that. But I do think that Nissa was a great companion. She does have her badass moments, like Arc of Infinity, for instance, and I will miss her. She does return in the Caves of Androsani, wanting as one of the visions telling the Doctor not to regenerate, not to die whilst he's regenerating. But yeah, I do think that Terminus is a very good story, and that does bring this time in the TARDIS to an end, but it is unfortunately plagued with issues. So Terminus gets a 6.5 out of 10. My next review will be Enlightenment, which sees the end of the Black Guardian Trilogy. Thanks for watching. Please let me know what you thought of Terminus. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't done so already. Until then, see you later.